Another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Friday, August 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing an alternate 2020 presidential election scenario that is actually not too far from what could have happened back in the 2020 election, this being a 2020 election scenario between former President Donald Trump, then incumbent President Trump, and Senator Bernie Sanders. So this is going to be a very interesting scenario. But before we do begin, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And I also want to remind you guys that channel memberships are now open if you would like to support the channel. You could do so by pressing the link down in the description or pressing the join button next to the subscribe button. And also in that spirit, I did want to give a very big thanks to our Purple Political Talk channel members, David Maxwell and Adam Hurst. We could not really do this without you. But now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's get started with the video. So, the 2020 election could have been vastly different if Bernie Sanders had been the Democratic nominee. And we're really not in a world too far from that actually happening. We were one endorsement away from Joe Biden not getting the nomination, from Joe Biden having to drop out because of a, lack of funds. And if it wasn't for Jim Clyburn's, endorsement in South Carolina, you could consider Joe Biden's campaign over. And that would have opened the way for a Sanders campaign to excel and a Sanders campaign to win the nomination from the Democratic Party. So I will say that truly, if this was the case, considering the national environment, we had COVID, but we also had a very big part of the election was based on social issues, police, the race talk, all of these different things became central parts of the 2020 election. And I think with Bernie Sanders on the ticket, the Democrats would seem affected. So there's parts of the country that I think Bernie Sanders could do better. There's parts I think that than Joe Biden, I think there's parts where he would do worse. But for example, in its, essence, our safe states won't change much. I would say the only difference is a lot of these states that barely went to the GOP by, likely margins, so there were going to be safe margins, for example, those states could revert back. And I think it just comes down to the fact that, Bernie Sanders could have won the nomination in the Democratic Party. However, at a nationwide perspective, when you talk about independents, when you talk about those groups of people, I highly doubt that 10,000 voters in Arizona, 12,000, 13,000 voters in Georgia would have voted for Sanders instead of Trump. And I think it's where we're going to see the biggest changes in this election and how it changes. And truly, this could have mean that we're in a different world today. That this could mean that Trump and the Republican Party could have avoided a lot of the very, very bad, events on January 6th. This could have meant that a lot of the policies that have been implemented by Biden wouldn't have happened. And, this would change a lot of, current events. But we're going to start with the prediction, and our electoral map as of right now with the safe states stands at 125 electoral votes for Trump and 185 for Bernie Sanders. So we're going to start by talking about leans or likely states. These are states that would go by less than 15%, but more than 5%. Let's start off with the Sanders campaign. I think that Bernie Sanders could have done well in two states. I think he could have done very well in Colorado. I think he would have done well in Virginia. I do think that in these two states, they would go, at least in Virginia, by a little bit lower than it went for Biden. I don't think Bernie Sanders is the best candidate for the suburbs. I think that here, 5% is probably where you're looking at around for Bernie Sanders. And in Colorado, I do think he would, escape with the lead. They're a liberal state for its entirety. And I think Trump could have made certain inroads with some more suburban voters, making sure that those margins come down a little bit. But ultimately, I do think at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders was still going to be able to win there. These are two traditionally Democratic states, and even if Sanders was the nominee, even as he is a socialist, I don't think a lot would change. At least not in these states. We have to remember that socialism is a pretty dirty word in the United States, and ultimately, it's going to be pretty difficult for, the Sanders campaign to make a very effective campaign, considering how much of a dirty word socialism is. So I think it's something that's going to really be hard for him. As for Donald Trump, I think that there's certain places where he would have just, taken Bernie Sanders for a joyride. Texas, I would go as far as saying Florida, Ohio, Iowa. All of these states would easily go to Donald Trump by, a margin of over 5%. Texas and Florida are two states where you can see the socialism message didn't work out. And the only reason Texas got really close in 2020 was because of the suburban support. And with all that said, Joe Biden didn't get as close as a lot of people thought. With Bernie Sanders on the ticket, I understand the world situation would have still been the same with COVID, a lot of different things. But considering where these states voted and where I think, certain parts of the country would trend compared to where they voted for, Biden, I think Texas and Florida could easily go by likely margins. Florida is a state that the socialism message was not popular. And the Republicans essentially painted Joe Biden as a stark socialist, when I don't really think that was the case. Now, with Bernie Sanders openly socialist, you could see Bernie Sanders get destroyed here. And I think in primary over primary, we saw how in 2016 and in 2020, we saw how, in Florida, Bernie Sanders did horribly in these primaries. And I think that would have, showed us how he would have done in a general election here. Iowa and Ohio are two other great states. I think that generally speaking, out of some of the swing states, Ohio and Iowa are actually two states that Bernie Sanders could actually go do a little bit better in than expected. I think he could bring down the margins a little bit. But ultimately, the white working class in these states would have turned out for Donald Trump regardless. And I think, again, against Bernie Sanders even more. I think that's also interesting to see because as we get talking about the Midwest, one of the interesting factors is it could have been closer than we think. I think that ultimately Donald Trump could have an advantage in the Midwest. However, we must remember that Bernie Sanders also appeals to that populist side of the country. And we cannot forget that one of the big reasons that Trump won in 2016 was in part of, a lot of Bernie bros who decided to vote for Trump because they closely identified to their political beliefs compared to what Hillary Clinton represented. So I think that states in the Midwest are 100% sold, but they could be a little bit closer. So that covers all our likely states except our two districts. I do think that in Maine's 2nd district, Trump would win by a likely margin. I understand this is the Northeast, but I think Bernie Sanders doesn't appeal to. He's a stark socialist. He's a Northeast socialist. They don't like that up there, so I think Donald Trump would win there. And the other congressional districts I'll get to in a little bit. So now let's discuss our lean states. Lean states are states that would go by less than 5%, but more than 1.5%. So let's start off with Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders, ultimately, I think he would have gone in a state like Minnesota. I think this is a state that was really, really excited to vote for the Democrats after a lot of the big issues with the BLM riots. So I think they would have voted for the Democrats. Taking a look at states like New Mexico, I think it's another place that Bernie Sanders could have really voted for. Something else I want to discuss about Bernie Sanders as we get into more Hispanic states. Bernie Sanders' Hispanic support was there amongst Democratic suburbs. I think that when it comes ultimately where we saw the big shift with Hispanic voters, when the socialism message was put out in the mainstream by the Republicans as a way to attack Democrats, I think that's what really turned a lot of Hispanics away from the Democratic Party. So places like New Mexico, I think, could actually narrow down a lot more than it was in 2020. I think you get under what, the Senate race margin could have been here in 2020. I think Bernie Sanders wins here by around 4 to 5%. Minnesota, same thing, 4 to 5%. I see Bernie Sanders winning. Somewhere else, I actually see Bernie Sanders doing pretty well. I think he would win by a lean margin, probably around 3 to 5% in New Hampshire. I think that he could just do very well there. He's from the general area. He's popular in Vermont, and I think Donald Trump was not well liked in New Hampshire. And I think in most 2024 scenarios, and I think in most 2020 scenarios, there wasn't really a world where you would see Donald Trump win in New Hampshire. So I think that's why, in New Hampshire would see it going to the lean Democratic Party. And then also, I do think that Bernie Sanders could have narrowly won, by a lean margin in Nebraska's 2nd district. I think this is a district that's going to more continuously vote for the Democrats, regardless of who it is. I just think what's really going to fluctuate is, the margin. And I think by a lean margin of around 2 to 3%, Bernie Sanders could have won here. So that covers our Democratic lean states. For the Republicans, I think places like Arizona, places like Georgia, places like North Carolina, I would go as far as saying places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania could have all fallen by the lean margin in this race. And I think that, generally speaking, The Republicans were going to have such a more easy election against Bernie Sanders than Donald Trump. And I think to a certain extent, one of the things that the Republicans should have done is something that Barbara Bollier in the state of Kansas Senate race did. They could have invested in getting the easier candidate. And, if they had done that, it would have been very interesting to see how that would have turned out. But generally speaking, I would have to say that Bernie Sanders is a 100% easier candidate because with Bernie Sanders, the Sun Belt would not go. I think that Bernie Sanders does not have the suburban appeal to flip Maricopa, to flip the Georgia suburbs to the extent needed. Yes, Georgia could have gotten closer based on 2020 results because ultimately, we must remember that another big factor of this was African American turnout. Now, with Bernie Sanders on the ticket, I'm not sure if, the white suburban vote in Georgia would have been enough. I'm not sure the suburban vote in Maricopa would have been enough. I would say that North Carolina would have gone by a little bit more. And in the Rust Belt, ultimately, I think it just really comes down to that one of the big reasons that a lot of people voted for Biden was was in a way because he also had the familiarity about the Midwest, about the industrial working class. And ultimately, with Bernie Sanders on the ticket, that would have simply not happened. So this is when you start seeing a lot of the shifts and how things could have been different in the 2020 election. This leaves two states in the tilt column. The tilt column is the closest of the states. These are states that would go by less than 1.5%. Starting off with Nevada, I think Bernie Sanders narrowly carries Nevada. I think ultimately the Republican Party could have made great inroads in the state of Nevada, get super close, but ultimately I think Bernie Sanders would have edged Donald Trump out here. And also in Michigan, I think Bernie Sanders could have ended up winning very narrowly. I think it just comes down to the fact that, he probably had the support there with a lot of voters in the Detroit suburbs and things like that. The Democrats have built such a good coalition in the state that even a Democratic Socialist could have won in the state. And we cannot forget, he won the Democratic primary here in 2016. So it would have been interesting to see what would have ended up happening. So our final electoral map in this scenario, very interesting, is Trump at 289 to Bernie Sanders 249. So this is a very interesting prediction. And I hope you guys enjoyed the alternate history. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So again, thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.